can now listen to full-length, commercial-free episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast on Patreon. Please sign up at patreon.com/Janice Selby or click the link in the show notes. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. My guest today is Rick Pidcock. He's a writer, poet, musician, and speaker, as well as a husband and father. And after 20 years of leading worship in churches, Rick embarked on a season of spiritual healing, where he learned to face his wounds and discover the wonders he had long been suppressing. Rick has written a children's book called What If? I know Rick as a writer and news analyst for Baptist News Global. We connected when he wanted to write a piece on Court 2022, the conference on religious trauma held earlier this year. Welcome, Rick. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you were a worship pastor for some 20 years. That's a lot of time to invest in your spiritual belief system and in working in churches. I was a pastor's wife, so I know it's not always the easiest working in churches. And now your life looks really different. I think you're working from home these days. Is that right?
Yes, I had a cleaning business for 20 years as well, and then became a stay-at-home dad in December of 2019. So,
And is that when you began writing for the Baptist News Global?
Yeah, so I came home with the desire to write as well. And I'd been blogging for years and started blogging a little bit on my own about then. And then I had a piece that was published by BioLogos, which is a Christian organization that helps Christians accept modern science. And that was
interesting. Wow, I had never even heard of that.
Yeah, so that was actually started by Francis Collins, who was the head of the National Institute of Health for many years, and was Dr. Fauci's boss. But anyway, so I had helped write a piece for them and had spoken there, and then Baptist News. I posted a article on my blog, and the Baptist News publisher found it and really liked it and asked me to write if he could post it. So I said, sure. And then it just kind of went from there. So
sweet. So my experience of you as a reporter or a journalist, when you covered the conference on religious trauma, I wasn't really sure what to expect, being from a Baptist news outlet there. And I felt like you were very even-handed in how you wrote about the conference. And I found you to be certainly, pretty liberal in your views. And now when you say the organization that helps Christians kind of embrace or accept science, and that you wrote an article for them. Did you always see the Bible kind of in a more metaphoric sense, or had you at one point thought it was absolutely literal?
Oh yeah, I grew up actually. My parents went to Bob Jones University, which is a very fundamentalist university. That was they're famous for the ban on interracial dating going even into 2000 until George Bush, it started hurting his presidency when he spoke there.
Wow.
So that's actually where I went to college too, and graduated with a degree in Bible in 2004. So I was, full on inerrantist. Like John MacArthur was considered to be a little out there. Southern Baptists were too liberal. So, that's where I grew up pretty much.
And so what happened? How did you get from there to here?
Yeah. So like when I went to Bob Jones, I was, technically a little more liberal than they were, in the sense that I thought John MacArthur was kind of cool. And I liked contemporary music, so we're getting a little edgy here, So I ended up moving out to Denver, Colorado after getting married, and to help start a church. And it was a conservative evangelical gospel coalition type of church. So we were very unaffirming of anything other than, heterosexual monogamous marriage, and, Bible's inerrant is inerrant, and young earth creation, all that kind of stuff. So we were there for about 8 years, and it ended up we had some issues when the pastor was very abusive spiritually towards his wife, and ended up getting divorced, and so a lot of that fell apart, and we ended up moving back here to South Carolina to be near my family, because we started having babies and stuff then. So we were part of this mega church here in town, which was, your typical, like, they don't want to say they're Baptist, but they've got all the Southern Baptist theology and lingo and everything. And I was leading worship there. And then in 2015, they had a worship school come in called the 10,000 Fathers Worship School. And I was so excited, because I've always written songs, and this was going to be a great opportunity for me to get my songs evaluated and stuff. And so they said on the first night, they told us that we needed to have God awareness and self-awareness. And I thought, well, my God awareness is totally fine. I don't have any questions about God, but I'd never thought about my self-awareness. And so they went through and they had us write down on a piece of paper our top 10 high points in life and our top 10 hard times. And as I started looking at that piece of paper, I started realizing that I had no idea how hurt I was. And I just, for the next year, journeying with them, had to come face to face with the very deep wounds that I had going back to childhood and the trauma that I had faced. And it didn't affect my theology at first. I started having some questions, but I suppressed them because I wanted to have a worship pastor job, Yeah. And then, but then I started having to listen to others, like some Catholic authors, or some like Henry Nouwen or Richard Rohr, that's very popular with Christians who have deconstructed. And like, these were people that were really out there. Like, if John MacArthur was considered on the edge, Richard Rohr was, on another planet, in another galaxy. So then, but I'm like, all of a sudden I'm listening to other people, and I'm facing these deep wounds that I've had. And so then basically a year after that, I graduated, and I had been in the cleaning industry for all that time, and then working for the church for free. So I was like, my body can't take this forever. I need to find a church job somewhere. So I tried applying, and churches just weren't accepting me. Like, I'd get to the top 1 or 2 candidates, and then they would go with someone who had more longer resume as a full-time church staff person, So I one day a church said, "This is you're the person. This is going to be a $70,000 worship pastor job, and this was going to drastically change our lives." And then a week later, they changed their minds, because they said they had promised their people that they would find someone who'd been in the lead worship pastor chair for the last 5 years. And because I'd just been in church planting and volunteer roles, they wanted to go with someone who had the resume.
That
so
stinks.
I was just ticked.
Yeah.
And for the next month or two, I just died to my need to be hired by a church. And then when I died to that need, all of a sudden, the questions that had been arising in me from my growing self-awareness, I started to feel free to ask those questions.
Wow. So really, it was the 10,000 Fathers worship course or worship school that got you thinking, when you actually, someone said to you, "I want you to sit there and think about some hard times in your life." And then sounds like that opened the door for you to contemplate some wounds from childhood that may have been family of origin. But when we grow up in fundamentalist homes, that family of origin is inextricably linked with religion. And so there's some religious trauma and some family of origin trauma.
Oh, yeah.
And then even when you're talking about the church plant, and you left the church, or the church fell apart because the pastor was spiritually abusing his wife. So, I'm guessing that possibly has to do with biblically prescribed roles and submission and all these things, wherein wives have no place to hide, no wiggle room, no nothing else, and the men, the husbands, are the ones absolutely in power and authority and calling the shots.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's where a lot of my questions that came up, like, for example, I don't know how familiar your listeners are with the Enneagram. It's something that's been popular, and I'm not like an Enneagram consultant or anything like this, but it was a tool that really helped me in the initial stages of my self-awareness to be able to see how some of these wounds were affecting me. And like I had this thought. So I thought to myself, somebody should do a study and show how God is the perfectly healthy expression of the Enneagram, because surely God would be perfect. So I started on the number 1, and I read through on enneagraminstitute.org or com. I don't remember which one. It's the website. Anyway, it has like 9 phases of health, and 7 through 9 are like unhealthy. And I started reading 7 through 9, and it was all the stuff about controlling, and you have to be right, and you threaten violence, and all of the stuff. And I started realizing, wait a minute, my God is the unhealthy expression of the Enneagram. And then I started realizing how much of my theology was actually numbing my pain and was actually fueling a lot of my wounds, and really setting up the power dynamics of the men in charge and the threats they make that were wounding me.
I gotta say, way to grow. That's pretty amazing insights. You got there by deciding you were going to write a piece on how great thou art, and then in the end you're like, ooh, maybe not.
Yeah. So then when I hear people like now today, by evangelicals' definition, to be a Christian, you have to believe in penal substitutionary atonement, that Jesus suffered the penalty that you deserve to pay, and he lived the life that you could never live. And, and everyone who doesn't agree with that is going to burn forever in hell. And so by that definition, I'm not a Christian. Like, by their definition, that I don't believe that. So then how do they handle me? They say, well, you were never truly of us, for if you were truly of us, you no doubt would have continued with us. I'm like, no, like I literally set out to show the healthiness of God and to prove God. So you can't act like I was never truly of you. You have no idea how much I gave to this. Yes.
So you essentially outgrew that childlike faith that believers are praised for. I mean, we know that as children growing up in fundamentalist homes, curiosity is stamped out quickly on in favor of obedience for most of us. We obey the first time, every time. And what we are praised for is being such a good, obedient child, rather than having questions and curiosity and wondering about things and trying to verify things. So at what point did you kind of become connected with science? Well, was that a tension and a struggle for you when you were kind of deeply in the fundamentalist evangelical fold?
Yeah, so I was young earth creationist. And then I kind of was like, I didn't really think about it that much, but I still wanted to prove the Bible was scientifically inerrant, especially with the global flood and stuff. And I'd send some of my atheist friends on Facebook like, oh, here's this proof that there was a global flood, and stuff to try to convert them or something. And then, but then again, my conservative evangelical church introduced us during the pastor's sermon to this thing called the Bible Project, which was this seminary guy and this artist who got together and put together these videos, these really cool videos. They look really great, of like explainer videos of biblical themes. And so our pastor, he's an inerrantist, he's a Calvinist, and he wanted to like spice up his sermon. So he put this video in there, and it was really fascinating. They're talking about Genesis and all of these literary links throughout the book. And I'm thinking, wow, this is like a literary masterpiece, which it is. I still agree with that. It was really well written, but because all the stuff like links to different things. But then I started to wonder, wait a minute, that's not how reality works. Like, how much of this literally happened? And so then again, it was the conservative evangelical thing that fostered a fascination with the Bible that got me learning the Bible a little bit more and realizing there's a lot more going on here literarily, that now, like, okay, well, I don't know what to literally believe anymore.
Wow. So was that a time of crisis for you?
Not for me, because I had done, again, a lot of this was in concert with the 10,000 Fathers worship school experience, and that was about fostering self-awareness and a deep spiritual health in me. So I felt a lot more open to listening to others and to asking questions and to pursuing wonder and to accepting who I am through that experience. And so I felt spiritually okay with asking the questions. After I died to my need to have a church job.
So you let that dream go.
Yeah. It's nowhere. It's not happening anymore. So
yeah. And that in itself, the death of a dream can be terribly painful. And it sounds for you like, well, it sure was upsetting when those people broke their word to you. Very disappointing, but it also, in a sense, led to your liberation, because it allowed you to really start asking some pretty probing questions. How was your wife? How were your kids when you were going through this process of moving from believing the Bible to be literal and having all the answers to, I guess not?
Yeah. So one night I sat down. So actually, it's kind of funny. We had in our notebook, our 10,000 Fathers notebook, they had an article that was entitled "Restoring Your Confidence in the Bible." And I was supposed to read it when I was a student, but I didn't read it because I already had confidence in the Bible. So I skipped that project. Well, I went back to it and I read it. And it was about like all of these problem passages in the Bible, all of the violence and the murder and all the genocide and all this stuff. And it wasn't making excuses for it. And it was, and I was like, wow, like this is really fascinating that other people are having these questions too. And so a lot of that I processed kind of privately. And then one night I sat down with Ruth Ellen and I said, I got to tell you something. And I don't really know how to put this, but I don't really know what I believe. And she was like, about what? And I was like, about anything. And we got it like, she's like, well, I knew you weren't young earth creationist, so much anymore. And I was like, well, I literally like kind of taken it down to the ground and I don't really know what I believe. And so I read her the article and she was like, yeah, that makes sense. And so for the next year or so, we would listen to audiobooks together. We would listen to podcasts together, and talk about it all the time. And it was a really, really good time for us to kind of explore together. And at the same time, we were still going to our conservative evangelical church. I was no longer leading worship, but we were just more and more dumbfounded. Like by the time we left, when we left the church, I was counting 40% of the songs that we were singing I no longer believed. And so I was like, I can't lead worship here if I don't even believe 40% of the songs.
Wow.
And so it was more like just seeing people celebrate violence, like a violent justice, and singing songs and dancing about it and jumping up and down. It was like, like what in the world? And so we left there and went to a somewhat more moderate Anglican church for a year after that. So, and we were kind of just journeying on that together.
Wow, I hope that's encouraging to any of our viewers who are on a similar journey, to know that it is possible. It can be possible. It can be done, to shift and grow away from that biblical inerrancy, kind of very small, narrow view, you can grow potentially with your partner together to have a greater understanding. And it doesn't mean that it's easy, but it is possible. And even when the one partner really, sometimes they dig in their heels and they become even more firmly entrenched in their belief system because their fear overwhelms them as they see you walking away from the faith. And I work with clients who are having that issue. And what I tell them in that case is we need to switch from focus on common beliefs to common values. Because our values can still be very similar with each other, even though our beliefs have changed. So I'm really glad to hear that that hasn't been the case for you and Ruth Ellen. And you have several children as well.
Yeah, and so that's a shift because we actually have 5 kids. Mm-hmm. So our oldest 2 grew up in church, and then our middle ones kind of remember the Anglican church that we went to, but then we ended up leaving that too. And the younger kids have never been to church. And well, they were baptized, I guess, as babies, but they don't have any memories of it. And so they've all been in their own individual phases of kind of deconstruction along with us too. You know?
So are the oldest 2 still living at home?
Yeah, that's our kids are ages 4 to 12. So
they better still be living at home.
Yeah.
And
every
so
other year.
you can have you're able to have conversations with them. They feel comfortable asking you questions. Do they ever ask to go back to church or comment on those things?
They the oldest had questions. Like, it was kind of a mixed world because he knew that I believed in modern science and the age of, dinosaurs and the age of the earth and everything. And he'd be like, he would have these, but he would kind of be in both worlds. So he'd say, well, if the dinosaurs died in the asteroid, how did they die in the flood? And, and some questions like that. And I've always kind of given them their space. I wasn't on this, mission to make him not an inerrantist or to help make him believe in evolution. I've always had this more open-handed approach when it comes to my kids. And so, he had a journey with that. And then, the second one, he's just not really that interested. So it's like, I don't know. I know that my parents love me and that's what I need to know.
Beautiful. And now he doesn't have to get up early on Sunday mornings either.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the others, have their own, curiosities.
What about your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Jones, kind of folks? How's that gone with them?
The extended family is kind of a mixed bag. So you've got some that are very they want to witness to you and confront you, and they feel obligated for your soul. And so you, especially with the Christmas cards and stuff, they put verses in there about Jesus being the only way. And they try, if you're at their house, they want to slip in the gospel in their prayers, and then there can be some very mean texts you get from some too, confronting you and how you're throwing your kids' souls away and stuff. And then there are others who they have all the concerns because they believe it, like they believe in hell. And so if you do, like, that is concerning from your perspective, but they're leaving it in God's hands.
Right. Yeah.
And so they don't get combative. And so it's when it comes to the family, it's kind of there are kind of a whole spectrum of responses that we deal with,
Have you had to lay out any boundaries in that sense as far as proselytizing and telling the children terrifying things like they're going to hell or mom and dad are going to hell, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've had to put our foot down and we've had to block people from social media. We've had to block family members from texting us. And I've reopened some of that with some of them to a point. Like one of them, I blocked them on social media and texting. So there was no communication unless they went through a third party that could filter their thoughts.
Wow.
But then I opened up to texting, but not to social media. But then I still got burnt from the texts sometimes. On my 40th birthday, I wasn't getting a happy birthday text. I was getting a confrontation text.
Oh, phooey.
And it's like, really?
I like your insight and your, of course, recognition that, okay, if they are, that's still their belief system. And it's not so much they're holding those beliefs as those beliefs are holding them and strangling them and preventing them from embracing reality. So they're having to stay in that very fear-based system. So when they're feeling that fear, it makes sense that they're going to be feeling so desperate for your soul and for your children's souls. And so it's pretty hard for them to put a lid on it.
Yeah. And on one hand, I understand where they're coming from when they want to witness to us. But on the other hand, I'm like, look at what you're doing. Like, you have a belief system that causes you to be unlivable, like impossible to live with. I went to a Denver Broncos, Tennessee Titans game, and there was this guy few years back, maybe 5 years ago or something. There's this guy outside the stadium yelling about hell, and you're all going to burn, repent. And there was another guy walking in near me, and he mumbled to his friend, he said, time and place. And that was one of those moments when I was still in the conservative evangelical church. Yeah. When in my mind, when I heard that guy say time and place, one of those questions that came up was, when is the time and place to threaten people? Even if you say it calmly and with a smile and with a cup of coffee, how do you tell a 4-year-old that they might burn for eternity? When is the time and place?
Yes.
But that was one of those questions I had to suppress until I didn't need a church job.
And I don't know if you've had a similar experience to me, but the longer I've been away from that really fundamentalist belief system, things come up now and like reminders of things that I believed. And I'm like, how could I have actually believed that? How did I, growing up in, this time and age with TV and science and all those things, how did I actually believe there was a talking snake, a talking donkey, a floating axe, had all these things? And of course, the answer was, but God, but Jesus, but miracles. Yeah. And so it was a lot of magical. Once you open the door for magical thinking in one area, guess what? It's all bets are off. Anything can happen if you're going to use magical thinking. And yeah, the farther I get away from it, sometimes I do have to remind myself, yes, I believed it 100% because I was conditioned to believe it. I was indoctrinated to believe it. I was surrounded by others who also believed it. And from my very earliest ages, it was my authority figures who were telling me these things and saying, these are true. Superman's not real. Santa Claus is not real. But, Jesus floating up on the clouds is real, or whatever the thing was. So I didn't have to worry about a Santa Claus watching me, taking notes on being good or bad, but I certainly had to worry about a God up there. Who was he going to write my name in the Lamb's Book of Life, or was he going to cast me into eternal torment? So that's a lot for a child or a teen to deal with, or even someone who's in their 40s who's never really looked outside their faith. And that's just, it feels overwhelming.
You look at what neuroscience teaches us about how complex our minds and bodies are. And we don't know a lot of the subconscious things that drive us. And that's right. And for even a 40-year-old to be burned for eternity when there's so much they didn't realize was going on beneath the surface, like, that's just unjust. And so, I'm reminded every day on Facebook, when I look at my memories folder,
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I see all my conservative Christian comments from 5 years ago, and you know, and I think one thing I've learned with the growth and self-awareness is to hold complexity together. And so I don't hate my former self. I'm embarrassed by my former self at times, but I also love my former self because I see the wonders and the wounds that was driving my former self. And I know that even as wrong as I was, like, I was present there and I was giving it everything I had in that world. And by giving it everything I had and continuing to go into it, I ended up having some self-awareness, which ended up moving me into self-compassion, which ended up moving into self-love, which in seeing and loving myself, I could then see myself in others and love them as well.
Wow, what a beautiful arc. That's just lovely. And yes, so curiosity kind of got you started unraveling all those things. And then you've moved into a state of self-compassion. And I think curiosity and compassion are two key ingredients when we want to be healthy, be as healthy as we can. That's so neat. Yeah. So what about, you have written a book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called What If, and I actually tried to release it, but was having some printing issues. And then Ruth Ellen ended up getting breast cancer last year. So
oh dear,
we've been dealing with that, and I haven't released the book. So, but so a few years ago, we had a birthday party for 3 of our kids, and because their birthdays were within like every other week, and so we decided to just do one big bash, and it was a Peter Pan Neverland party.
Fun.
And so we did it outside, and we made the backyard look like Neverland, and just, you know, went all out, had a meal and everything. And so then, like, the party's going great. And about towards the end, all of a sudden my mom just kind of panics a little bit. And she goes, I can't believe that it hasn't started raining, and that it had, you know, the storm hasn't happened, and that the party hasn't been ruined. And I looked up, and there was literally not a cloud in the sky. It was perfectly blue. And I was a little confused. And then I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, you're wearing sunglasses. And her jaw just dropped, because for the past 3 hours,
oh my gosh,
like, she was totally convinced that the storm was here. It's about to go down. Everything's about to get ruined. When in reality, it was just the lenses she was seeing her world through.
That is incredible.
And so that's kind of been the preface of the children's book, is the mind games that we play. The what if this happens, and what if that happens, and what if this happens? And a lot of that is formed by the lenses that we have that we're not even aware of. And self-awareness can help you realize the lenses that you're seeing through, and see how that's forming your questions. And it was kind of funny because, like, after that, I actually asked my mom if I could see her glasses, and I put them on, and I looked up in the sky, and it looked horrifying. And so
wow.
post kind of metaphorically, like post deconstruction, I kind of see that almost as an exercise in compassion. I think a lot of these people are causing a lot of harm, but and I hold that as true. And if you read my articles, you know I don't hold back in confronting them. But on the other hand, alongside of that, when I see the lenses that they're seeing through, I can see how scared they are. And so I hold that too. And it's a lot to hold together, to be able to hold the complexities of that together. But that's life.
Yes. And I mean, fundamentalism is so so binary. There's no room for complexity and nuance. It's just there's this way, and there's this way, and there's no other way that it can be. So it's really a matter of maturity for us to get to a point where we can see, well, actually, it's not just this or that. There are many other things, many other ways of being and thinking. And I feel like this is a big problem that we're seeing, certainly in the United States right now, but in Canada too, as far as people are getting quite riled up with a lot of fear-based thinking and only thinking there's this right way or there's this wrong way, and that there's nothing in between. So we've lost sight of the need for us to be able to coexist and all have our own different ways of thinking and being, and that even when we're quite polarized, there must still be some things that we agree on. But it's like that's getting totally stamped out and muffled by the shouting, all the shouting that's going on.
Yeah. And like when I hear a lot of that either or stuff, my mind really goes back to cosmology. Like if you look at Genesis 1 in particular, you've got the waters above and the waters below. You've got the light and the dark, the male and the female, the animals and the human. You've got all these binaries. It's this and that. And yet if you look at like what we now know to be true, there was no time when the light was separated from the darkness. Like the earth was revolving around the sun and was present in the light and the darkness. And there was a time when the earth wasn't even there, and so like it's all like cosmologically, everything is related. Everything is a spectrum. Everything is shades and becoming. The presence is a becoming. It's not just static, separated spaces. And so I think that has to have a bearing on reality, and it has to have a bearing on our processing of reality. And I see theology as our processing of cosmology, of what is. It's our trying to name what is. And when the ancients did that, the ancient cultures, they did it in a hierarchical way. They believed in a hierarchical cosmos, which with God at the top and angels below that, and humans in a hierarchy of power dynamics below that. And you all related to each other in relationships of worship and honor and service and power. And a lot of the religious dialogue that we're seeing in America today, and there are relationships that were set up and ethics that were set up in that ancient hierarchical cosmos. And a lot of what I think what we're doing is saying no, the either or binaries and the Tower of Babels that we set up, with white men at the top, like those are based on realities that are fake. They don't exist. And I see atheists as providing a very important role for helping Christians come to terms with that. And let's accept the cosmology that we have. Let's accept the becoming that we are. And then let's recognize that in our own bodies and in our own stories.
I really like that. That feels like a very compassionate way of viewing our situation right now, our social situation. I really like that. So you're no longer a biblical literalist. And by some definitions and terms, you couldn't even really be called a Christian. Yeah, you don't refer to yourself as an atheist. So you're somewhere just on your journey of humanity, and you seem comfortable with that. Like you don't have to strongly identify in either camp.
Yeah, I feel I struggle with the certainty of either camp. It feels too certain to me. And I'm not gonna bash an atheist for calling themselves an atheist, or bash a Christian for calling themselves a Christian, but I'm more comfortable in the becoming of where I'm at. And we'll see where that goes. I mean, there's been parts of this journey, when I left the conservative evangelical church, but I still was in another church that believed in evolution, but then started teaching their kids about the global flood.
Right.
And so that's why, they weren't affirming. And so we ended up leaving because of those things. And so but it was an important space for me during that time to move out of the conservative evangelical world and get into a space where I would actually listen to women preaching, and so like, I don't know where I'll be in 5 years from now. Where do we know where humans will be in a million years from now? Will we have evolved beyond where we're at? Like, that's our reality. Let's live into it.
Where are you finding community these days? That's something that I hear from a lot of folks. They really struggle when they lose their faith community.
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts on that. Like, for one, I know a lot of friends who really struggle with wanting to have more liberal, progressive spiritual spaces. And so, I've done some stuff where we'll get together and talk about things at like a bar or in someone's backyard. And those are fine. Sometimes they're nice. Sometimes I feel like we're trying to do church too much, but honestly, like, I don't really necessarily feel the need for those spaces. There's like, you think about the difference between a cloister garden and a chasm. Like, a cloister garden is this thing that monasteries would put together that was this little spiritual space of connecting with nature, but it's very highly cultivated and planted flowers and plants and everything's controlled within the walls of the monastery. And I think that maybe sometimes those things are helpful, but I've left the monastery and now I'm out in the chasm. And I'm out in the woods and in the forest, and I'm saying it's okay here. Like, I see my relationship with all creation, and I know that sounds like a cop out, like, oh, you see yourself related to the trees in your front yard, but I actually do. I actually sit and look at the trees and I learn from them, and I don't feel the need to be in a cloister garden right now.
Wow. So a little bit more personal, when Ruth Ellen got sick, did that shake you or bring into question the whole notion of God and faith and all these things?
So when she got cancer, I was pretty caught off guard, for one. And it was, the biggest knot in my stomach. Like, we were in our 30, we were 39 at the time with 5 kids. And we were just now, like, she is an interior designer. And so we've struggled financially our whole lives. And she just got that job and was doing really well. And I'd struggled with the cleaning industry, barely making it. And so there's a lot of like fears, like, what does our future look like? Am I going to have to give up on writing and go back into cleaning? Like, where could I even get a job to take care of us? Is she going to be okay? Like, I don't want to lose her. And so there were a lot of questions with that. But then we would have some Christians would come in and they would say, well, it's really sad that you're not part of a church. And honestly, like, we talked about it and we're like, we feel like that would just complicate things so much to have to go through all of the glory formulas. Like, when she's sitting on a couch, she's lost her hair, she has no strength. And I look into her eyes and she's a shell of who she was. And I have 5 kids running around in a messy house that I've got to take care of and take care of her. Like, I don't need to be worried about God's glory and making sure I say the right things to make sure he gets the attention and the glory. Right. Like I need to be here for her. If there's a God, if there is a creator, my assumption is that God would want me to be present with where I am and the people that I'm around. So I'm going to be here as a full human with her, with my kids. And if there's a God worth being in a relationship, then that God will be fine with that. If that God needs me to be talking about how great they are and stroking their ego, that's not a God that I care to be in a relationship with.
Mhm.
So
Wow, you're giving
felt like
yourself
it would have
lots of
complicated
space.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think you're approaching it really practically and with a lot of wisdom. Your focus needs to be on your wife and on your children and just getting by. And I wonder then, so you're writing for Global Baptist, oh no, Baptist News Global.
Mm-hmm.
And is that like, do you have a column that you write for them every month or every week, or what's that like? And are you kind of their liberal person on the staff?
No, they're actually, so they're very progressive.
Okay.
And so they're constantly putting, pro LGBTQ articles up. They have a lot of progressive people who write for them. And so I've basically been putting out, so it's actually kind of funny. I actually went to seminary post deconstruction too. And
interesting.
yeah, so that's a whole nother part of the story. but so when I was going through that, I had to be careful how much I was writing for them because I had a lot of like actual papers and projects to write for school. Mm-hmm. And then I went through a fellowship with them, and that I had to do an article every week. But now it's more freelance, so I can do whenever I want. But I've been trying to put out one a week for them as I'm able to. But I've maybe I'll miss a week or two here or there. So.
And you, in that vein, you attended the conference on religious trauma. It was an online conference. This was just earlier this year. Were you surprised by anything that you heard, or was it what you were expecting?
I went in with no expectations. I wondered, with it being more of an atheist space, if it was going to be, and knowing the trauma that people have, like, I don't want to be dismissive of people expressing their pain. People that have been hurt by the church need space to express their pain and to express their anger over very real things. And I think that's important. And so I knew it was probably going to be a very honest place of where people are feeling. Mm-hmm. I think what surprised me was how caring the speakers were and how wise they were in acknowledging that and then helping people move forward into healing.
Right.
There were some very practical things that you can do. Like, are you struggling with a fear of hell? Okay, here's a path for you to walk on to help you heal through that. And so, I think people's pain, conservative evangelicals try to dismiss ex-evangelicals because of their pain. They say, oh, you were hurt, so you're just seeing through your hurt. Right. And to me, I'm like, no, these people have been hurt by the hierarchy, and so they recognize something that you don't. And so they need to be heard, and they need to, have a space to point out how harmful that is. But also, I thought what your conference did was to help people also move into healing as well, which was really helpful.
Nice. Thank you for that. Did you find any resources on your own journey particularly helpful for you? Were there speakers or books or video series, podcasts, anything you can think of that's been particularly helpful to you?
Just through the whole deconstruction process. Yeah. And a lot. And I think it's one thing that is interesting is to try to find like what's helpful for a certain person at a certain time. So like I mentioned earlier, the Bible Project was something that really helped me see the literary connections of the Bible, but I don't listen to the Bible Project anymore. There was a time when the Bible for normal people with Pete Enns was really helpful. But I'll listen to it sometimes now. Or there's like I like a lot of Rob Bell, but even him, you look at his earlier books, and he was still pretty evangelical-ish
Yes.
in those earlier stages. But then like now he's in a much different space now with his latest book and where he's at with his podcast. And so, I think one thing I try to do when people ask me for books, I try to find out where they're at, or podcasts, I try to find out where they're at and find something that's going to help them meet them where they're at. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to be blown away with like the early church fathers believed, like some of them believed in universal salvation. Like, wow, I'd never even heard of that. I thought everyone believed in eternal conscious torment. So I might recommend a book by Thomas Talbot to them. Whereas it doesn't really matter to you what the early church fathers believed. So I'm not going to recommend that book to you,
Right.
So,
oh, you got a lot of wisdom there. You're very pragmatic. And you strike me as just a really compassionate person who's interested in giving people space on their own journey. I like that. We could use more people like you, I think. Well done.
Yeah, I just want to help you become more self-aware. Not you, but
Yes.
you and whoever I'm talking with.
Right.
Like grow in self-awareness and become in touch with your humanity. And they're different, depending on where you're at, there's going to be different resources that are going to help different people at different times. So
Very good. Where can people find you?
So I have a website, rickpidcock.com. And on that, it's got links to all my articles wherever. And then they can find me on Twitter at Rick Pidcock, Facebook at Rick Pidcock. Instagram, sometimes I'll post there too. So,
and of course, they can take a gander at Baptist News Global.
And all the Baptist News articles are on my website too. So
very good.
So they can kind of go from there. So, yep.
Well, I'm grateful that you have spent time with me today on the Divorcing Religion podcast. It was really just interesting to hear about your journey. Please give my kindest regards to your wife. And just keep on going together the way you're going. It's been a beautiful story so far.
Yeah, definitely. Looking forward to it. I really appreciated it.
Okay. All right. We'll talk to you again soon.